Welcome to Week 8 with Perspectives on Disability. I'm Professor Greg Long, and this week we're going to be talking about community and independent living. But like with every lesson, we'll start today with an etiquette question. So our etiquette question for the day is, when someone uses a personal assistant, and some of you may not even know that a personal assistant would be the individual somebody who with a severe disability may need assistance with dressing or transportation, toileting, cooking, any number of things. There are individuals who are out there who can provide those services. They're referred to as personal assistants. So if you were talking to somebody who had a personal assistant, would you talk to the individual or would you talk to their assistant? And the answer to that is certainly think about it. If you were that person who was using an assistant, would you want some stranger coming up and talking to your assistant about you? Or would you rather them talk to you directly? And that is the point. So you talk to the person directly. It works the same way when we talk about people who use sign language interpreters. If you're talking to someone who's deaf and they have an interpreter, talk to the person who's deaf. Don't talk to the person who's the interpreter. So don't say, hey, ask him if, or what do you know about? Talk to the person just like you'd have a regular conversation. Now, I will say, as we move into today's lecture, that this is a difficult topic, and it's a huge topic. And I apologize in advance for anyone who's listening who says, oh, why didn't he cover this, or why didn't he cover that? I was really directed in kind of creating this from the perspectives of the various guest speakers and the input I've had from students across the years, as well as the students who were involved in making this MOOC. Because really, truly, this is a big, big topic. So what we have done for you is provide a lot of resources, websites, videos, other things that as you check the course site's homepage for us, our webpage for the class, you can look at any of these topics in a significantly more detail. I will also say that not only is this a particularly large topic, but it's one that's very personal to me. It is very important to me. And I know that over the semester, or over the course, if you've been watching these, you've heard me talk about my family. And this is really where it does become personal, because with my brother, who is deaf and multiply disabled, our father died when I was 16. I've been his guardian since my mid-20s, mid to late 20s, so for almost 30 years at this point. I've been very involved with getting him access to services, getting him employment, and most importantly, getting him places to live. And it's been a challenge because he was at home for a number of years. Sent him to a program in Texas called the Southwest Center for the Hearing Impaired. And there he got a lot of evaluation, got some skills, some training. And they were fortunate enough, and this is in the 1990s, to have received a grant. And this was probably one of the coolest things ever, because what they did is they went to an apartment complex, and instead of having, one of the buildings in the apartment complex be for, those deaf, people, what they did was they scattered the people throughout the apartment complex, and then they had one central location where it was staffed 24/7 by one of their workers. And it was great because they could check on my brother, and if he had any questions or concerns, could go to them. But it was grant funded. And sadly, like lots of grants, when the grant ended, the program itself fell apart. There was no continuity. It wasn't able to be sustained. And so from his perspective then, he was pretty much left out in the cold. So I brought him up to where I live, outside of DeKalb, and worked very diligently to get him set up. And what I found was there was very little available for him. He came up with no money, no health insurance, no job, basically nothing. And to get all those things set up and find him a place to live that was appropriate took probably, I'm guessing it was about 18 to 24 months to pull that together. And now he's in a place where he's happy, he has friends, but it's a far more restrictive environment because he is in a group home versus being where he was in Texas, in an independent apartment, able to take care of himself with some limited supports. So it does present some issues there. And then, as I've mentioned, I have a stepson who just turned 29 and has autism. And from my standpoint, he's even more of a concern because with my brother is set, my brother's happy. But with my stepson, he is pretty much stuck at this point because there's no funding for people with his particular, if you will, kind of constellation of disabilities associated with his autism. Because he's of average intelligence, if not better, but yet his autism affects him in a way such that I can't trust him to cross the street independently. There's been more than one time where I've grabbed him and said, no. And so for him, it's an ongoing worry for my wife and I. What happens in the future? We're trying to get things in place, but when we're not around, what happens to him? So the overall point that we're going to make in this lesson is that there is no right one answer, that the goal should be for individuals as well as families, choice. What are options that we might be able to select? So as we think of how we'll approach this particular lesson, I am going to give you a little bit of disability history. And I know we haven't hit much history in the past, but need to talk about history from the standpoint of how people with disabilities have historically been segregated, institutionalized, kept away from mainstream society. I want to talk about the idea of access and inclusion as a civil right. Mention some barriers to living in the community, and then end with support strategies and solutions for how we might make things different, how we might make things better. So in summary, like I said, this is a really, really big topic. We want people to have choices, and that with work, we may be able to make difference over time, but it is something that we will have to continue working on for the foreseeable future. So with that, I would like to move into the next segment.